Here, Mr. Modi had a strong majority in the parliament. He was also very sure that he could deal with the US on equal terms. And then we saw a greater confidence in the way the NDA government has engaged the United States and began to fix many of the problems that were left, unresolved by the UPA government.
In this week's column, in this week's Raja Mandala, we obviously focused on Prime Minister Modi's US visit. There's going to be a meeting with Biden, what it means. So one of the most interesting things is that now it's almost as though the relationship has reached a level where a visit like this is hugely significant yet expected. Once every year that this kind of bond, what has moved, what are the main things that have gotten us to this point, say 2008 and now, and why is the relationship one that has become such a sustainable one, despite having India not being in a US ally or in that camp in that sense historically, and even now as a much more independent foreign policy actor?
No, I would say you're right in saying that the relationship has steadily improved. I mean, if you take a trajectory from President Bill Clinton's visit to India in 2000 March, it's been on an upward trajectory across different governments in Washington and in New Delhi. This is also Prime Minister Modi's not the first trip to Washington. He's been there before. But what is different this time? I mean, I would say we are at a turning point. Until now, the focus of the last 20 years, has been on removing the problems in the relationship. For example, George W. Bush took this big initiative to resolve the question of nuclear dispute between India and the world. He also, separated the relationship with India and Pakistan. That was another complaint that we've had. And then we had both Obama and later Trump trying to expand the framework in which they would deal with India. But what we're seeing, I think, in this visit is really, for the first time, outline an expansive agenda of actually real cooperation. So, for example, the jet engine technology transfer that is going to be likely to be announced. We've been talking about technology transfer for a long time. We've been talking about defense cooperation for a long time. But this really makes us a transition from a buyer-seller relationship to one of actually co-production and development within India. And they're also going to lay the framework for bringing the research communities, universities in the defense domain together. So I think this is a turning point. Second, I think there is also the larger question of emerging technologies. That in the last few months, the so-called initiative on critical and emerging technologies has been outlined. What we're seeing is today the recognition in Washington and in Delhi that collaboration on these advanced technologies, whether it's quantum computing, artificial intelligence, or telecom, that these are not just technology for technology's sake, because these are going to be the cornerstones for modern economy. So they're looking at actually this cooperation that would really, both countries are looking to transform their own economies, and these technologies are going to play a role. So working together, the confidence is that it'll help both the countries. And here again, both sides have to lift a number of regulatory obstacles for more cooperation. But I think that's where the commitment is likely to be announced. A third area.
Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. The third area, is really on how to think about security. That until now, we've been engaged in debates on, Asian security. But now I would say there is a sense that India and the US need to work far more closely to military domain. To construct a new balance of power system in Asia, to generate deterrence, to help the weaker countries to stand up against aggression. So I would say we're really moving from goodwill, removal of obstacles, to actually to lay down concrete, specific, substantive cooperation on military technologies, on generic technologies for the economy, as well as on the broader military security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific.
So one of the things you point out in the piece, which is very interesting, everyone, please read the piece. It is on the IndianExpress.com, and hopefully it should be there in the video description, wherever you're watching this. There is a the obstacle hasn't been people. There was a lot more, in fact, among the people of both countries, there may well have been a lot more desire for greater, like, there's very little resistance you find about us being close to the US in terms of a public thing, and we imagine vice versa. What is it that in the UPA years and even now, what is it that has taken it this long for the Cold War was over now, 3 years, well over 30 years ago now. So what is it that's taken us this long to get to this point?
See, during the Cold War, I mean, there were fundamental differences of ideological nature. For example, India chose a socialist, inward-oriented economic path, while the US was the world's leading capitalist country. The US was confronting the Soviet Union, while India saw Soviet Union as an ally as well as an ideological soulmate. So I would say, Cold War, it is understandable that how we thought about the world and the regions were fundamentally different. What we've seen after 90, when the collapse of the Soviet Union, was there was a steady incremental expansion of the engagement, but the residual legacies from the Cold War, because in India there was, in the Indian political class, there was a deep suspicion of the United States, and that became an obstacle, both, for example, especially in the UPA government, which had a strong left participation in UPA 1, and the Congress party itself was not sure whether we should do more cooperation with the United States. While the Bush administration, the nuclear deal and the defense cooperation that they offered were really big breakthroughs, but the UPA was not in a position to consolidate, seize those opportunities, because the fear that somehow any collaboration with the US would undermine India's independent foreign policy. It's now almost 20 years since the nuclear deal was announced. I mean, we haven't bought a single American reactor. It has not killed India's independent foreign policy. So, but I think the sum of the ideological fears was so much that poor Manmohan Singh had to go to the parliament, seek a vote of confidence. And what was an executive decision?
Yeah.
That's probably the only time on which a foreign policy issue became so contentious that he had to go to the parliament to seek approval. So I would say it is that fear of engaging the US, the suspicion of the US, that led to squandering of the opportunities that came our way under the UPA government. But I think that's where the difference between UPA and NDA. I mean, here, Mr. Modi had a strong majority in the parliament. He was also very sure that he could deal with the US on equal terms. And then we saw a greater confidence in the way the NDA government has engaged the United States, and began to fix many of the problems that were left, unresolved by the UPA government. And over the 9 years, there has been much progress. But now is the big time. I mean, I think from moving from merely signing, for example, on the foundational defense agreements, or to talk about economic cooperation, to actually unveiling concrete, substantive cooperation that we're talking about. I think the big thing, as the briefings have been saying, is the US support for India's defense industrial modernization. This idea was there in the 2005 defense document that Pranab Mukherjee signed when he went as the defense minister of the UPA government to Washington in June 2005. So we've squandered 20 years. I mean, that it's taken us that long to what was the principle that could have benefited us because of the hesitations, one at the political level, and second was at the bureaucratic. There was entrenched resistance within the bureaucracy, so comfortable with the Soviet-Russian connection that they were not willing to explore the new options with the United States. And it's only in the last few years that we've begun to do that. And here again, I think the capacity of Prime Minister Modi to drive the Indian system and the bureaucracy to take a fresh look at the United States, that's one. And third thing, which the defense reforms that Mr. Modi initiated, of ending the monopoly of the public sector companies and bringing in the Indian private sector, has made a big difference. Because all the time we talk about transfer of technology as something foreign companies would just come and hand it over to the Indian bureaucracy, but that has to be a commercial decision. It has to be a business to business decision, and I think that's where the collaboration, say, for example, Airbus, Tata's, and the Airbus are producing the C-295 aircraft, which was unveiled last year. That you have to get the business, companies, because unlike in India, unlike in the Soviet Union or Russia or China, intellectual property is held by the companies.
Yeah.
Americans can't tell Lockheed, please go give it to India. They're nice guys. But we've already seen some transfer. When Tata's, for example, produce subcomponents for Lockheed, for Boeing helicopters, that when two companies meet, then it's a business decision. How that works out, and India is actually Tata's export the components to the American supply chain, but our approach has been, give me everything now. I'm the public sector, I'm the great Indian scientific department, and I'll do it, and I'll get anyway. The money comes from the Indian taxpayer, so your job is to hand me over the technology. But I think that was a unreality by which we tried to talk about transfer of technology, and I think today we're seeing some of that change. And I believe in this engine technology transfer that the GE and HAL, that General Electric and Hindustan Aeronautics Limited are going to sign. There is going to be participation of the Tatas and other large companies, as well as the conditions for participation of a large number of small and medium enterprises. Because nowhere in the world just one company produces the engine. And my sense is the idea that this would actually create conditions for generating an aerospace ecosystem in Bangalore, in Hyderabad, and other areas that could actually eventually create the conditions for aerospace production in India.
Right. So one final small bit, a lot is made. How much do you think of, these things Prime Minister Modi does? One is the personal relationship aspect, which is spoken of, as well as, he's going to be now, so I think he's visiting eminent US private sector guy. I think there's Neil deGrasse Tyson on the list, and if I'm not wrong, perhaps Elon Musk as well. Certain sort of stalwart. How far does these kind of so-called softer initiatives? There was Howdy Modi, which became a bit controversial during his last visit. How much does that help the relationship along? And is that part of the package now of India-US relations?
No, I think the business is a serious, it's not a soft thing. I mean, that's really hard stuff.
Yeah.
Because in the US, the government does not tell the companies what to do. And I think you have to reach out, create conditions for the American private sector to come and invest in India. And under Mr. Modi, and there's been a big effort to do that. And my sense is the reforms of the last few years under the NDA government, the simplification of a large number of norms and the emphasis on, Atmanirbharta or manufacturing sector, as already we've seen Apple produces more iPhones in India today. So I think it has raised hopes for American participation in Indian manufacturing. And the PLI scheme, the Production Linked Incentive Scheme, India hopes will bring in more capital. There is talk about the Micron is a US silicon semiconductor company is going to likely invest in India to begin part of the supply chain process for the semiconductors. So I think we're going to see a lot of that, because this is very, very important. This is really hard stuff. Diaspora, of course, has been very much part of Mr. Modi's engagements abroad. And I'm sure there is going to be an event. I believe there's going to be an event in the US, in Washington. So this is now part of the course. And but I think the challenge this time, of course, is that some of the divisions within India are going to be reflected in the Indian diaspora. You're going to see some protests, I'm sure. But there are also already unity rallies, where Mr. Modi's supporters are already generating. So there will be large Indian diaspora support, but there'll also be sections of Indian diaspora who oppose the BJP and Mr. Modi. So that will also be there. But then in the US, these are again par for the course that any foreign leader comes, there'll always going to be some protests. So I don't think we should take it too. That's really very much part of the political culture in the US.
Great, sir. Thank you so much. It will be a good visit to see, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Akash.